Okay, well, I just want to welcome everybody to the final concluding event to our 2021 Big Read Spearfish. This has been a wonderful program. It's been a really fun, great time to do another big read during a really important time in history right now. So with that, I want to welcome everybody to the final keynote presentation with my guest here, Marsha Mittman. This is Eastern Influences in Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our special guest tonight and then kind of pass it on to Marsha. So with that, Marsha Warren Mittman is the author of a humorous memoir, You Know You Moved to South Dakota from New York City, Guin, Western Horizons Award winner, released by Scurfpia Publishing, and 4 books of poetry. Her short stories, poems, and essays have appeared in various literary magazines and anthologies in the United States, Britain, Germany, Australia, and India, including 6 Chicken Soup for the Soul tales. She's received writing distinctions in the U.S. and Ireland and a writing residency at the Fairhope Center for Writing Arts in Alabama. A Spearfish resident for the past 22 years, Marsha's traveled extensively for work, having visited over 125 countries and islands around the globe and 46 U.S. states. During several trips to Asia, she was attracted to the philosophical disciplines of yoga and Taoism, which Ursula Le Guin, author of our NEA Big Read Choice, The Wizard of Earthsea, practiced. For the past 30 years, Marsha has incorporated these practices into her daily life. A long-term meditator, she's studied with advanced practitioners here in the States and abroad and has personally conducted meditation, spirituality, and spiritual film programs in 12 states. Today, she's going to illustrate how Le Guin, in The Wizard of Earthsea, wasn't only introducing readers to Eastern thought, but actually offering them a guidebook to implementation. However, first, a few words from Marsha before we refer directly to Earthsea's storyline.
Thank you, Matthews Opera House, for this opportunity, and everyone else, thanks for joining us. I'm going to give a bit of personal general background and explain how my interest in Eastern thought started, suggest some books, and then we'll directly discuss Earthsea itself. There's a lot to cover, so forgive me, I'm using some notes here. But first, these few lines I'm about to read come directly from the frontispiece of Ursula's book, before her story even starts. She's therefore immediately showing readers her interest in Taoism because she specifically juxtaposes duality, a main tenet of Eastern thought. So, from the frontispiece, only in silence the word, only in dark the light, only in dying life, bright the hawk's flight on the empty sky. What's Ursula referring to? Only in silence the word. Only when you are silent, still, with an emptied mind, can you find the word truth. Only in dark the light. One must go through trials and tribulations, the dark, to find the light, the truth. Only in dying life. Until one's ego, one's programmed concept of self, dies, one can't know the truth of what one's life and reality actually are. Regardless of what you've been taught, there's a rebirth that occurs here. Bright the hawk's flight, when this awakening is reached, an incredible new awareness is achieved. And last, on the empty sky, the awareness can't take place until the mind is purged of previous concepts, i.e. the empty sky, the Tao itself. So, a general explanation. There's a force in the universe available to anyone that has far-reaching implications. Eastern philosophies, disciplines, and religions, and indigenous peoples are aware of this. Here in Western industrialized societies, though, accept the esoteric material of the 3 Abrahamic religions, Gnosticism and Christianity, Kabbalah in Judaism, and Sufism in Islam. There's been very little mention. And until recently, these Western esoteric texts weren't even available to the public. The 2 most popular texts this universal force is explained in, with suggestions on how to cultivate and incorporate it into one's body and psyche, and actually become it, that's the key, are the Tao Te Ching, which Ursula Guin, author of this year's big read, The Wizard of Earthsea, follows, and the Bhagavad-Gita. The Bhagavad-Gita, which some feel is 10,000 years old, and more on this later, wasn't translated into English until 1784. The Tao Te Ching was first published in English in 1868, but the clearest translations of these books' intent didn't occur until the 20th century. So only in the last 30, 40 years here in the West has there been wide interest in this life-changing body of Eastern thought, to the point where you now have endless luminaries in all fields following some understanding, if only meditation. To name just a few, and the list is voluminous, but we have Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs in tech, to singers Tina Turner, Sheryl Crow and the Beatles, Rupert Murdoch and Oprah in media, Einstein and Tesla in science, director Martin Scorsese, writers and actors galore like Tom Hanks, Julia Roberts, and loads of musicians, painters, and CEOs. Even Prince Harry. Notice something about all these folks? They're extremely creative. So what do these people know that we don't? They're all tapping into this pure, raw energy source, the universal energy I mentioned previously, a divine source, according to some. All these creative people have learned that Eastern thought teaches you to open up to this incredible energy, how best to use it, and ultimately achieve tranquility in the process. So, how did I become interested in Eastern thought over 30 years ago? In college, I'd enjoyed and struggled through a tough, in-depth 2-year immersion into Western philosophy. The likes of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Nietzsche, Machiavelli, you get the picture, the big thinkers. A few years later, I was sent to Japan for work, and it was there I was introduced to Eastern philosophy. Over the past 35 years or so, I've periodically been hired by a travel research firm for various unusual projects. This trip, I was testing if a new guidebook to Japan's sites would work. At the time, group tours to Japan were extremely expensive in a country where nothing anywhere was posted in English. So independent travelers who didn't speak Japanese had no way of exploring the country by themselves on the cheap. The guidebook I was charged with testing had a unique approach that could allow intrepid travelers to explore independently. So in essence, and this is important regarding Earthsea, without knowing, speaking, reading, or understanding a native language at all, and no knowledge about a destination, a lone traveler could experience a wonderful journey. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because that's exactly what Ursula Le Guin did with The Wizard of Earthsea. Her book, though a novel, is actually a guidebook for readers to understand Eastern thought without knowing any specifics at all. Using Taoist tenets gleaned from the revered Tao Te Ching, Ursula takes her readers on a step-by-step journey they know nothing about to discover something they're unaware of. But here, the discovery is about ourselves. For like Ged, the protagonist in Earthsea, we ourselves are the destination. Though the Tao Te Ching itself covers widespread topics, since the focus of a Wizard of Earthsea is Ged's journey to awareness, I'm going to limit discussion to how the Tao can affect a person's life, or else we'd be here for hours. Very few people today could or would take the time to read the Tao's ancient texts. However, and here comes Ursula's genius, a novel is another matter. That's considered entertainment. And that's what Ursula accomplished. She introduced some serious, potentially life-changing material in an entertaining way. A reviewer in The Nation called Le Guin, quote, the most transcendently truthful of writers. So Lao Tzu's the Tao Te Ching discusses the Taoist way, and the Bhagavad-Gita, which is yoga, discusses the path. These are Eastern thought's two most influential texts. I suggest translations. I'm going to show these to you. Here's the Tao Te Ching. I suggest translations by Stephen Mitchell for the former, and either Juan Mascaro or Annie Besant, this one's fallen apart from use, for the latter. There are many similarities between the two philosophies. Both have a panoply of divisions to aid awareness and consciousness expansion. Some contend that the Tao Te Ching developed from yogic material. For any advanced viewers out there, I suggest Copra's The Tao of Physics, and also Tarthang Tulku's Time, Space, and Knowledge. There's also one other text that isn't very well known. Lao Tzu wrote another book, and that's called the Hua Ching. And this is actually my personal favorite because the Tao Te Ching deals a lot with government, politics. This one deals more with a person's individual journey. So, Carla, I know you have some questions about Eastern influence in the Wizard of Earthsea.
Yes, big time. So I guess for starters, I think a good place to start would be who is this Lao Tzu, the author of the Tao, and am I pronouncing that right? And can you just give us a little?
As far as I know.
Yeah, but yeah, can you just give us a little more about who he was and yeah.
Okay, so though some historians believe he was a legendary figure, Lao Tzu is generally credited with writing the Tao Te Ching. He was a 6th century BC philosopher and writer. He had a son and supposedly didn't approve of his behavior. So he gathered together all the wisdom he could muster and composed a book for him, hoping to change his ways. This became the famed Tao Te Ching. Apropos, Guin wrote a book about another young man changing his ways, the Wizard of Earthsea.
That's right. Kind of funny how it all starts with a young person. So how about this word Tao, or like it's Tao, right? Not Tao, T-A-O, Tao. So what does that mean? Can you give us a gist of what that means?
Okay, most often the Tao is called the way, but it's also known like yoga as the path or the road. The Tao Te Ching, the book explaining the Tao, is generally called, quote, the way of integrity, and it has 81 short verses. Lao Tzu's lesser-known work that I just showed you, the Hua Ching, also has 81 verses. Side note, the Bhagavad-Gita has 18 verses. You see a similarity here?
Ah, yeah.
If you add these numbers individually in each book, you get a total of 9. In numerology, another ancient practice, 9 is the symbol of completion. So if followed assiduously, by the end of each book, a reader should reach the culmination of an important stage of growth. More on this later, as number 9 figures prominently in Earthsea. All these practices actually align with the aforementioned system built into humans' anatomy and psyches for the activation of a latent, untapped energy source at the base of the spine that leads to many benefits, including consciousness expansion. Footnote, in neither the Tao or the Gita are these fanciful, fictional, philosophical suppositions. Their premises are rooted in science and fact that are currently being verified by scientific research.
Okay, so I get now that the Tao is kind of the road or the way, and that's kind of a broad term. So what exactly does the way mean? And I'm sure it could be a lot of different ways, but yeah.
Specifically, it's a blueprint for cultivation of the mind, i.e. consciousness expansion, through living simply in the world with goodness, wisdom, and integrity. It's an essential guide to living a full spiritual and ethical life. It encompasses 4 main principles: simplicity, going with the flow, letting go, and harmony. And interestingly, and I love this, and it's the same with the Bhagavad-Gita, by the way, the book can be understood on 3 different levels: the way of human life, the way of the universe, and the way of ultimate reality.
Interesting. Very cool. So for, people like myself or a lot of our viewers out there listening who are still really new to this concept, what can happen if we start to practice the way, like what can we start to see, or what could even develop?
As readers start to apply the book's principles in their daily lives, like Guin on his journey in the Wizard of Earthsea, one's consciousness starts to expand. leading to awareness of personal shortcomings. As one works to overcome these, one starts to let go of extraneous concepts, feel a balance, understand broader, deeper, universal concepts, and ultimately the actual nature of reality. Now, mind you, this does not happen overnight. But what you will notice in your everyday life is a wider scope, more patience, more tranquility, a natural balance, increased compassion, deeper understanding, greater abilities, a need for silence and simplicity, and in these troubled times, less stress.
Ooh, yeah, absolutely. Like you said, in times like this, you know, the Tao is sounding pretty great. So kind of back to this being, you know, still pretty new for me and probably a lot of our listeners. How similar are I guess are the Tao and yoga similar? Are they the same religion? Are they religions? Can you kind of explain those two concepts and how they work together?
The Tao and yoga were not religions originally.
Oh.
They were only disciplines. But eventually, some religions incorporated their concepts. It gets a little confusing, so I'm just going to read this to you. Hinduism, originating in India, is generally considered the oldest organized religion in the world because it incorporates yoga Vedic material, which is thought to be 10,000 years old. And that's from the remnants of a prior lost, extremely advanced civilization. These texts were written for the physical and spiritual uplifting of humanity. The texts are the source of a vast body of knowledge, collectively known as yoga, and I'm not referring here to what's currently called yoga in the US, the popular exercise programs so prevalent today. And I'm not denigrating them, it's just that this is very different. Eventually, the Hindu religion incorporated this ancient secular yogic Vedic material into their religion. The practice of a codified yoga, not just the 10,000-year-old Vedic material, that appeared around the 5th or 6th century BC. It also originated in India as a purely disciplinary practice. Buddhism arose somewhere between the 6th to 5th centuries BC and also incorporated yogic material into their religion. Now, Taoism is later. It arose somewhere between the 6th to 5th centuries BC and also incorporated yogic material into their religion. Taoism, Ursula's interest, is based on the unity of two opposite forces, the yin and the yang, into balance and harmony. It originated in China in the 4th century BC and also has a wide panoply of practices. Adherents eventually started a worship regimen around secular Taoist principles. So neither the Tao Te Ching nor the Bhagavad-Gita were religions at their inception, were disciplines only, and they don't have a god like Western religions, but they were eventually incorporated into religious practices. The result is that in the world today, there are people, and this is like me, that are practicing both secular disciplinary versions of both yoga and Taoism, but also there's the Hindu and Buddhist religions that have incorporated yoga and a Taoist religion that incorporated the secular traditions of Taoism. Little confusing.
Okay, so now that I feel that I've got a little bit better of an understanding of Taoism and the way and kind of how yoga and the Taoism have shifted over the times, bringing it kind of back toward our book and the Wizard of Earthsea, how did Ursula learn about the Tao?
Ursula was, actually she was very fortunate because she had a very advanced mother, but Ursula was introduced to the Tao at age 14 by her mother, who was a practicing Taoist. By incorporating her beliefs into her writing, Ursula eventually emerged among a select group of writers who literally changed science fiction into the profound transformational genre that it can be today. She's one of America's most honored writers, a philosopher, a feminist, a conservationist. Her writings always teach us something. This is a brilliant woman.
Mm-hmm. It really is. It's been my favorite part about this whole big read is Ursula, to be honest. So what's the point of both Tao books and the Bhagavad-Gita? Bhagavad-Gita. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
these are good words to learn and practice, but are these like Bibles, or like what could you compare these to? Yeah, give us a idea on what these are.
Said before, they're basically disciplines, and what they do is they detail journeys through the application of universal principles to attain specifically expanded consciousness, humility, discipline, wisdom, and control, to overcome ego and live in harmony, in balance, in flow with the cosmos. When this wisdom is attained, a natural knowing and power arises that are used only to achieve and maintain a balance in man and the universe. So, for example, not Ged's flashy, self-serving wizarding tricks, but rather Ojian and the rope master's careful, measured responses to issues. Over time, when carefully followed, both books' practices trigger that innate latent energy previously mentioned that is already built into the human body and mind.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I like how that connects into Ojian and that character and how kind of philosophical he was. So, Marsha, in your opinion, and kind of based on some of these trains of thought that we're looking at today, what would you say is the point of a Wizard of Earthsea or Earthsea?
Well,
as
first
a
I want to
series?
point out, I'm by no means an expert on any of these books, but what I have done, though, is concertedly follow their tenets without any religious overtones for the past 30 years, simply because I felt they were truly important and they made sense to me. They were a path to personal growth. So I'm going to read some verses directly from the Tao now to try to explain its intrinsic nature and give you an idea of what it's trying to show you. Then in a nutshell, because this is the only way a reader can understand what Guin was trying to accomplish with Ged, I'll explain what a spiritual path is. So this is directly from the Tao. And you have to jump all over because they're in no specific order. So I picked out some that try to explain what the Tao itself is about. There was something formless and perfect before the universe was born. It is serene, empty, solitary, unchanging, infinite, eternally present. It is the mother of the universe. For lack of a better name, I call it the Tao. It flows through all things, inside and outside, and returns to the origin of all things. The Tao is infinite, eternal. Why is it eternal? It was never born. Thus it can never die. Why is it infinite? It has no desires for itself. Thus it is present for all beings. The Tao is called the Great Mother, empty yet inexhaustible. It gives birth to infinite worlds. It is always present within you. You can use it any way you want. I love that one. This is important too. There are different levels, as I mentioned. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. And this is where Le Guin gets her interest in naming later on.
Right.
The unnameable is the eternally real. The Tao is like a well, used but never used up. It is like the eternal void, filled with infinite possibilities. It is hidden but always present. I don't know who gave birth to it. It is older than God. And then 2 or 3 more. Look and it can't be seen. Listen and it can't be heard. Reach and it can't be grasped. Above, it isn't bright. Below, it isn't dark. Seamless, unnameable, it returns to the realm of nothing. Form that includes all forms, image without an image, subtle beyond all conception. Approach it, and there is no beginning. Follow it, and there is no end. You can't know it, but you can be it. At ease in your own life, Just realize where you come from. This is the essence of wisdom. And the last. Since before time and space, the Tao is. It is beyond is and is not. How do I know this is true? I look inside myself and see. And apropos of that, I look inside myself and see. I'm going to read a quote from Albert Einstein. I love this. I think 99 times and find nothing. I stop thinking, swim in the silence, which is the Tao, and the truth comes to me.
Those are some great quotes. So you said that, so the going into the silence and, the spiritual journey, what exactly does that mean? Is going into silence the journey itself, or?
Yeah, that's part of it. It's a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's following certain principles and going within to find a reality beyond what you've been programmed into thinking. So I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself by talking directly to you. So let's go to the notes again so I don't skip anything. In essence, in Taoist terms, it's really submerging oneself in the actual Tao, in its flow, and actually becoming part of its flow. It means coming to the realization that you've been taught to live a particular way. And that way not only isn't the soul way to live, but isn't even an authentic way. It's an external creation. And it's only in the silence that an authentic existence can be found. Silence being the mind that's emptied of all accumulated knowledge and thought. Let me read that again because it's important. And it's only in the silence that an authentic existence can be found. Silence being the mind emptied of all accumulated external knowledge and thought. It's here that duality is unified, that harmony and peace are attained, that one can open to universal cosmic existence, all of which are the essence of the spiritual journey. So for the skeptics out there, I want to show you a chart, and this is very, very hard to see. I couldn't blow it up. Everything in the universe is a vibration. So for example, inanimate things like rocks vibrate at much lower levels than animate creations. This chart of vibratory rates shows how, in humans, vibratory rates are much lower when one is sad, fearful, angry, in pain, or close to death, and much higher numbers when someone is happy, peaceful, experiencing joy. So the numbers are tiny, just to give you an idea. When you feel guilty, you are vibrating at 30, and it's usually I don't know whether it's megahertz, but whatever the numerical designation is. When you're guilty, 30. When you have fear, 75. Pride, 175. But then you go up to acceptance, 350. Reason, 400. Love, 500. Peace, 600. Enlightenment, 700 to 1,000. So both these Taoist and yogic practices teach you specifically how to raise your vibration to more beneficial levels. For non-believers, if you want to confirm this, go to YouTube and check out Hindu, Buddhist, Tibetan, even Christian Gregorian chants. And on many of them, you'll find after their titles the exact corresponding vibratory rates for the effect the chants can achieve, just like the numbers listed in the chart that I just showed you. And just a little interesting side story. Many years ago when I was living in New York, the Dalai Lama visited, and he chanted and gave a speech on the Great Lawn in Central Park with thousands and thousands of participants. At the time, New York was in the throes of a terrible extended crime wave. The Dalai Lama suggested everyone in the audience meditate to curtail the crime, and said we would see a difference in 24 hours. This is very funny. Attendees could see the police watching the crowd smirking all over the place. Sure enough, the number of daily crimes being perpetrated dropped significantly. The dip lasted for about 5 days and then returned to previous highs because the meditations had ceased. So what happened? For a short time, all the meditators had changed the vibratory rate of the city's atmosphere. And that is precisely what going into the silences and a spiritual path achieve for the practitioner. One's vibratory rate changes so that one's personal atmosphere, if you will, shifts higher. And that, my friends, is Ged's journey in a nutshell. So now that you're armed with some background, let's go to the actual text of Earthsea and compare it to the Tao's tenets. I've chosen some buzzwords for Kyla to mention, and then I'll illustrate how Ursula repeatedly stresses the concepts to show how Ged initially acts, starts to transform, and ultimately transcends to a higher version of himself. Note that each category can have just dozens of examples. I'm going to read just a few since time is limited. But first, some generalities about the book's text itself. I want to mention how it's not just Le Guin's storyline that's a guidebook to growth and expanded consciousness. Throughout her book, Ursula drops hints via concepts, words, and numbers to subtly indicate spiritual intent. Examples. Earlier, I mentioned there are 81 verses in each of the Tao texts, in each of the Tao books, and 18 in the Bhagavad-Gita, hinting at completion because they add up to 9. Well, there are 9 teachers at Roke, indicating they've already realized the completion of their spiritual journey. There are 18 men and boys in Ged's village when he summons the fog, and 18 leaders in Low Torning. Added, each is 9. Even Originating says mastery is 9 times patience. The number 9 is used throughout the text. There are even 90 isles in one area of Earthsea. But it isn't until the 10th and last chapter that the number 10 is mentioned. 10 symbolizes transcendence. Ged's and Vetch's trip home took 19 days, which in numerology is 10. You have to add them, so the 9 and the 1 is 10. Again, their journey symbolizes transcendence. This means that ego is gone and you've been subsumed by the Tao. Now, all Le Guin's numbers just can't happen by accident. Again, the boat that starts Ged on his journey is called Shadow, but the boat in which he vanquishes evil is called Look Far. That's the expanded consciousness. The symbol of the Tao is the yin-yang. I'm sure you all know this symbol. Yin-yang symbols duality, the opposites we always live with. We're either hot or cold, tired or awake, happy or sad. We're always either or, not in balance. The symbol itself is always portrayed in black and white, also considered opposites. Another opposite example is that matter, which is stagnant, is opposed to the fluid, which moves. Hence, the title of Le Guin's book, Earthsea, the title of her series. It in itself is a reflection of the yin-yang because it's indicative of opposites. Earth is matter and the sea is the fluid. Ged is later known as Sparrowhawk, the name itself indicative of the duality just mentioned, for the sparrow is generally considered a small, weak bird, whereas the hawk is a powerful bird of prey. But Sparrowhawk also references growth, the actual spiritual journey from being weak, a victim of negativity and universal forces, to having the power to control oneself and these universal forces. As for names, our hero's true name is Ged, which could be considered to reference God, but he's on a journey of awareness that can lead not only to spiritual understanding, but to a realization of the nature of his own divinity. And all the story takes place in the reaches, suggesting the Tao's way is the vehicle to reach for something more, for something higher. And this observation I love, courtesy of Dick Bodman, a sinologist and retired professor. Ged's most important teacher is called Ojian. As mentioned, a spiritual journey details becoming aware of one's ego to overcome shortcomings. Dick feels that Ogion's name backwards could be considered no ego. So OGION, he's equating to OGEON to be no ego. But I believe it references the Tao principle of going with the flow. OGION backwards is no I go. And the I is what is subsumed, and you go with the flow of the Tao. So it alludes to not allowing your own personal desires to dictate your actions. Much is made of the true names in the book, and this deserves particular mention. This refers to the true nature of what we ourselves are, what we could become through cultivation of the mind, and the true nature of reality and the cosmos. We're all, each and every one of us, extremely powerful individuals that modern thought and institutions repress. Le Guin's message is to become aware of these restrictions, reawaken our inherent powerful abilities through the Tao, and help restore balance to ourselves, our world, the cosmos. She named the 10th chapter the Wizard of the Wizard of Earthsea, the transcendent chapter, the open sea. It references the flow of the Tao itself as an exterior endless sea inside our own minds, as well as the exterior sea in which we all live. Before we segue into the text, I'd like to paraphrase a comment from one of Le Guin's book jackets. Quote, in the Tao, in giving up all concepts, judgments, and desires, one's mind has grown naturally compassionate and finds deep in one's own experience the central truths of the arts of living, such as the more solitary we are, the more compassionate we can be. The more we let go of what we love, the more present our love becomes. The clearer our insight into what's beyond good and evil, the more we can embody the good. And you don't do because you realize everything is in harmony as is. At the end of the journey, in all humility, the master can say, I am the Tao, the truth. Now to the text itself, starting with Ged's two greatest flaws.
All right, we should start with pride.
The big one.
Yeah, his biggest flaw at the beginning anyways.
All right, so I'm going to be reading a whole bunch of quotes now. Quote, Ged's pride would not be slighted or condescended to. Quote, for the most part he was pride and temper. The new archmage to Ged after he unleashed the shadow. Quote, you were moved to do this by pride. But there's a turning point when one follows the Tao, when one begins to change after following the principles. And this is illustrated in Lo Torning, when its leaders say Ged, the new wizard, is, quote, without pride, because rogue wizards generally go to grander places. So Ged's self-awareness has begun.
Yeah, that's pretty cool that they kind of put it right there for you. Okay, how about as he kind of develops and starts to get more powers as a wizard?
Well, the problem at the beginning was that he hungered for power and didn't know what he was dealing with. So, quote, Ged hungered to learn to gain power. When Jasper is a sorcerer and Ged's still apprentice, he tells Jasper he'll match his power act to act, not knowing what he was dealing with. Knowing Ged's weakness, Lady Bendereth tempts Ged to free the stone. Quote, you will be mightier than all men, a king among men, you will rule. Then the turnaround after Ged struggles. Last chapter. Ged uses his incredible power to keep the boat afloat hour after hour. And this is the key, one of the keys of the Tao. This shows his new use of power, the point of the Tao, learning control of yourself, of power. And the last chapter, again, Ged, realizing his mistake, says, I traded all the sunlight for a handful of power, for a shadow, for the dark.
Yeah, I like that use of the word control to kind of signify that. So you mentioned Jasper in the previous one. It kind of reminded me of Ged's ego. How about that?
Quote, Ged thought, as the apprentice of a great mage, he would enter at once into the mastery of power. Though forbidden, Ged uses books Ogian hasn't even allowed him. He has, quote, the wish for glory. But later on, the new archmage tells Ged the shadow he called forth is the shadow of his own arrogance and ignorance, loaded with ego.
Right. How about darkness and just sort of the symbolism of evil that they're working with?
When Ged is looking for a summons to raise Ged's spirit, quote, he had been reading without any light in the darkness. After Ged is attacked by the shadow, he's rendered blind, which is darkness, deaf and mute, as well as physically scarred and lame, showing that not acting in accord with the Tao brings consequences, and they're dark consequences. And then comes the turnaround, as I mentioned. The powerful dark stone locked within the walls of Teranon can affect the balance of the world. Lady Benderess tempts Ged to become the stone's new master by saying it can help him defeat his enemy, and then he would, quote, have control over his own destiny, strength to crush any enemy, mortal or other, foresight, knowledge, wealth, dominion, and the highest wizardry higher than rope. But Ged has learned. He refuses.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, like, one of the themes that we've been really at the Matthews working a lot with is with this antagonist, the shadow. What's the significance there? I feel like there's so much there.
There is. I could have written a whole story, a whole speech just on that.
I believe that.
And this is the first comment I have is prime. When Ged enters Roke, quote, a shadow followed him in at his heels because he sees it as external, not yet part of himself. And that's the problem we all have. We all place blame on something else. We don't realize that there's something intrinsic in us or that we've done that causes our own shadows. And then, quote, the shadow, darkness itself, waits for Ged. It had no being except for what Ged gave it. In succeeding chapters, the shadow hunts Ged because Ged doesn't yet realize that he himself has to vanquish the shadow he's cast. And that's the Tao's way. You're taught how to vanquish your own shadows. At the end, after Ged and the shadow say Ged's name together, which is the realization that they're one, Ged has taken responsibility for his darkness, and there is unity, no more duality, a transcendence into balance and the equilibrium, which is the point of Taoism.
Great. What's the fuss with all these names? You had kind of mentioned it a little earlier, but can you give us a little bit more on Le Guin's kind of the true naming of everything in Earthsea?
Okay. Until you know the reality of things and of yourself, you're actually dealing with illusion, with darkness. There is a truth that's universal. It does not deal with what you've been taught, where you live. There is a universal, all-encompassing truth. And that is what she's getting at with true names. So initially, Ged's aunt, quote, all the words of true speech she had learned, she taught Ged, but it wasn't enough. She realized his power. Ogian gives Duni his true name because Ogian knows true speech. The first winter with Ogian, Ged learns the roots in the old speech, that language in which things are named with their true names. And magic consists of this, the true name of a thing. So at some point, if you stick with the Tao or with yoga, you start to learn basic truths that are universal. And that's what Le Guin is hinting at.
Okay. How about the Tao's way and how it relates to the Wizard of Earthsea?
Ged actually starts on the Tao's way on Rope No when he realizes he literally killed the Archmage who saved him from the shadow. He begins to realize who he is and what he's done. And that's what Le Guin is telling us. Who are you? What have you done? What's the reality of what you are and what your life is? So the first third of Le Guin's book illustrates Ged's negative traits. The whole first third is his negativity. But then we see him start to struggle to become principled, to undo the evil he's caused, i.e. to discover true names. It isn't until the very end that he's transcendent. So, examples. Finally taking responsibility for his actions, Ged asks to eliminate the Pender dragon's threat so that he can be free to deal with the shadow. After the stone incident, Ged returns to Ogion saying, this is very important, quote, I have come back to you as I left, a fool. I have walked with great wizards, but you are my true master, Ogion. Ged has had an awakening that the silence, which is what Ogion represented and is where the importance is. Mm-hmm. Ogion tells Ged he will always be hunted unless he hunts the hunter, i.e. vanquishes his own negativity, the essence of the Tao. And Ogion paraphrases the way, quote, a man needs to turn from darkness and return to his beginning and hold the beginning. If he would not be a stick whirled in the stream, he must be the stream itself. And that is a reference to the Tao. At the end, Ged in his boat is backed into an inlet with no outlet. You've got a duality there anyway. But basically, this symbolizes reaching your deepest point of self-confrontation. He finds the shadow in his boat behind him and, quote, no wizardry would serve him now, but only his life, his own flesh. Meaning, only each person on the way can do for himself what needs to be done to rid himself of his own personal demons.
And how about the dragon?
Oh, I love the dragon.
Yeah, fun part of this book.
The dragon is actually the pivotal symbol in the book of Ged's growth. Ged becomes a dragon to vanquish some of the small dragons. This represents the unleashing of that innate power at the base of the spine that I previously mentioned, which is always depicted across cultures as a dragon or a snake. Mm. Ged guessed and was right about the dragon's true name, and so now he has power over the dragon, meaning that Ged has now unleashed and is controlling his own dragon power. The dragon owns mighty riches, pirate hordes, all kinds of worldly goods, but Ged isn't interested in them, indicating that he won't be using, he's grown, he won't be using his newfound depths of power for negative purposes.
Right. Well, you just mentioned growing. How about Ged's kind of growing compassion that we start to see throughout the book?
This is where the book starts to switch after we see that the power is coming, the understanding is coming. So initially, Vetch is shown as Ged's opposite. Le Guin says Vetch has a great gift, kindness. Vetch also, at his own peril, goes with Ged to defeat the shadow, whereas previously Ged was only interested in himself. But now we start to see Ged's positivity grow. He sets a spell on a boat made for a craftsman's son to keep it safe, but only does so after checking that he isn't demeaning the craftsman's skill. When the child is dying, Ged, quote, with no thought for himself, sends his spirit out after the child's spirit to bring it back home. The dragon offers Ged the name of the shadow that's hunting him, but Ged turns the dragon's offer down. He turns the knowledge of the name down to make sure to procure the safety of the people where he was a wizard. And this, of course, makes life more difficult for him.
Right. How about Ged's growing humility?
It's hand in hand. Even though the new Archmage won't accept Ged's fealty because of what he's done, Ged actually asks to stay at Roke to learn how to undo the evil that he brought into the world. And this is the beginning of remorse and humility. And it's the beginning of his walk on the way, the start of him understanding the Tao. After the shadow's attack, Ged can't learn as quickly. He's being taught humility. Quote, since the night on Roke Knoll, his desire had turned as much against fame and display as it once had been set on them. And also, quote, he knew after this long, bitter, wasted time who he was and where he was. Ged also fears the stone at the court of Teranon and says he no longer has the power to control it. Quote, the powers of earth are not for men to use, and in men's hands they bring only ruin.
How about the importance of simplicity in the book?
Yeah, that's one of the Tao's main tenets. At the beginning, Ged said to Ogion, he goes, Ogion is the epitome of simplicity, but I haven't learned anything yet. And Ogion replies, because you haven't found out what I'm teaching. Ojian, against his better judgment, says he'll send Ged to wizarding school, though he prefers to keep Ged with him because, quote, what I have is what you lack. And then, of course, there's the turnaround, like I've mentioned before. When Ged returns to Ojian and Guin before hunting the shadow, quote, there was a great wish in him to forego all wizardry and venture, forgetting all power and horror, to live in peace like any man on the known dear ground of his homeland.
How about, we're talking about Ojian, him and his silence, how about the importance of silence in our characters?
Ojian says to hear, quote, one must be silent. The master Nema lives in isolate tower because you can't learn the true names of things until you are isolated, until you go into the silence. And after the shadows attack, Ged actually goes into the silence. Quote, silence is what he sought, because only in silence, in introspection, can you learn the truth of reality, true names. In the last chapter, all sounds were lost as they neared the shadow. They were, quote, in a huge place of silence that might have been unbroken forever. Also in the last chapter, when Ged and the shadow face each other, quote, in silence, man and shadow met face to face, and they both said the same name, Ged, at the same time. So Ged has found the truth, the true name of the shadow, in the silence. This all is a metaphor, of course, for going into the depths of the silence of your own mind.
Okay, great. So how about death? Can you talk to us about how death is explained in this book?
The way is, quote, let me just check here. Okay, the way is, quote, to hunt a shadow over land and sea to the lightless coast of death's kingdom. And death here isn't just referring to the physical, it's also referencing the end of the programmed mind, the ego. And that's the real point of the book and the Tao. When Vetch's sister asks Ged about death, he answers, quote, for a word to be spoken, there must be silence before and after, meaning she must first know the reality, the truth of the word. And the turnaround, regardless of the peril, Ged sails west to his death to meet with the shadow. And the point is, you have to face death on any of these paths to be reborn. And the death is not necessarily a physical one. It means the death of the concepts you've been taught to understand and to revere. It's the inculcation. That's what the death is of.
Right. And so with all the bouncing around between sort of the physical and the metaphysical, what is considered the real?
Le Guin wrote about a true wizard's true knowledge of reality. Quote, he dealt with no illusion. And that, again, the illusion is what we've been taught that to believe is real. The wizards deal only with true magic, the summoning of such energies as light and heat and the force that draws the magnet, and those forces men perceive as weight, form, color, sound, real powers drawn from the immense, fathomless energies of the universe, which no man's spells or uses could exhaust or unbalance. And those are the basic universal concepts I was talking about earlier. In the last chapter, Ged went alone into a realm where there was no east or west, no rising or setting of the sun or of the stars, i.e. he's going into the Tao. In the last chapter again, when Ged leaves the boat and strides forth with his staff, emitting a clear white glow, you've got the light there, quote, there were no directions here, no north or south or east or west, just going towards the truth or going away.
Okay, can you please explain balance versus duality?
The shadows Ged unleashed affected the very balance of light and dark, life and death, and good and evil in the world. Quote, the world is in balance and equilibrium. A wizard's power of changing and summoning can shake the balance of the world. Ojian, quote, every word, every act of our art is said and done either for good or for evil. And then the change, the last chapter, Get and Vench, quote, went now toward the very center of that balance, toward the place where light and darkness meet. After Ged and the shadow say Ged's name at the same time, quote, Ged reached out his hand, dropping his staff. He didn't need the staff with the light any longer, and took hold of his shadow, of the black self that reached out to him. Light and darkness met and joined and were one. So Ged balanced in equilibrium because he's walked the Tao's path and transcended duality to become whole. He finally becomes light.
Well, and with that, can you know, explain light? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very important. Light is the point of the Tao, the yin yang symbol again, and Le Guin's tale. Her novel, as guidebook, illustrates how to turn negativity, i.e. darkness, into light. Le Guin actually presents her philosophy on page 227 of this particular version of Earthsea that we've all been reading. Quote, light is a power, a great power by which we exist, but which exists beyond our need in itself. Sunlight and starlight are time, and time is light. In the sunlight, in the days and years, life is. In a dark place, life may call upon the light, naming it. So the pure white light of Ojian, the archmages, and eventually Ged's wizard's staff, those are the things that dispel extreme darkness. And regarding shadow and light, quote, the thing was bodiless, blind to sunlight, a creature of a lightless, placeless, timeless realm. It had as yet no substance that the light of the sun would shine upon. And after being tempted by Lady Benderesk, Ged says, it is light that defeats the dark, light. As he spoke this, he saw plainly as if his own words were the light. When Ged built his second boat and gives its previous owner, who was going blind, the gift of sight, the old man paints eyes. I mean, you can't be more explicit than this. He paints eyes on the side of the boat and appropriately names it Look Far, as I've mentioned. He says, I had forgotten how much light there is in the world. And Ged, this is what I meant by Le Guin peppering the whole text with hints. Ged leaves on the day called sun return. So Ged is getting his light back. At the end, when he's going to face the shadow, Ged is in the east reach where the sun rises, where he has been reborn of light and become a master, as the Tao says, of himself. There's no more shadow. He's only light. He's gone beyond duality. And he actually sees the shadow through the light of his staff, which means that light is now illuminating his way.
Great. Okay, so to wrap things up here as we're kind of getting to the end of this presentation, can you just kind of give us some words on the Tao itself and just kind of wrapping it up?
When Ged first sees the Archmage at work and their eyes meet, suddenly, quote, a bird sang aloud in the branches of the tree. In that moment, Ged understood the singing of the bird and the language of the water falling in the basin of the fountain, and the shape of the clouds, and the beginning and end of the wind that stirred the leaves. It seemed to him that he himself was a word spoken by sunlight, end quote. So the Archmage is already one with the Tao. The Archmage is already light and knows the true meaning of everything. Ged saw and understood a reflection of this and even sensed that he was a word spoken by sunlight. But it isn't until Ged undertakes the way himself to cultivate his own mind that he overcomes duality and becomes balanced, one with the Tao himself. And that's Le Guin's message to all readers. We have to do the work to become the light.
Right.
So my own conclusion is, if you have any further questions about Le Guin, the Wizard of Earthsea, the Tao, or yogic teachings and practice, Kyla has graciously indicated he'd be willing to schedule a Q&A Zoom gathering from the Matthews to further discuss these concepts and how to incorporate them into your lives. And I'd be happy to share insights. As mentioned, all Western religions are later than yoga and the Tao, but they, in their esoteric literature, incorporate some yogic and Taoist concepts. I'm also no expert in Native American practices. It would be interesting to understand how these fit into the bigger picture, since the Tao purports to have always existed similar to Native beliefs. Anyway, if interested, shoot Kyla an email at engage@matthewsopera.com, and we'll see what we can arrange. Thanks all for listening. It's been a pleasure. And now to Kyla for some final remarks.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Marsha, for joining us here today. Okay, so we had been talking for, a few months now, getting ready for this keynote. And, we had been talking about how much connection there was between the Tao and this book. But now this presentation just showed even more. So that was really fun for me to see, and all of the quotes that you found. And I mean, there are some just brilliantly spot on connections between these two. So thank you. That was amazing. And like Marsha said, for those of you, she said, reach out. I'd love to schedule a Q&A so we can actually have people ask these kind of questions, being that this was, just a challenging year in itself, doing a lot of our big read programming, having to do it in this Zoom format. We want to make sure that all voices are heard. But with that, this concludes the entire 2021 big read. So thank you, Marsha, for helping me finish this amazing program. Thank you to the National Endowment of the Arts and Arts Midwest, and really the whole community of Spearfish for being along with us to this whole crazy ride. It's been really fun and a whole new kind of look at a big read. But yeah, thank you all.
And here's to big read 22.
That's right. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.